The day I got served with a $10,000 fine from the Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association for excessive noise pollution was the day I decided some people needed to learn what real consequences felt like. I'm Scott Reynolds, and I've lived in northern Vermont my entire life. The snow here isn't just scenery, it's a way of life. When I bought my property 3 years ago on the outskirts of Burlington, the house sat right at the edge of what used to be unrestricted land perfect for snowmobiling. The trails connected to a massive network that wound through the mountains, and that access was honestly half the reason I bought the place. The other half was the privacy, or what I thought would be privacy. About 6 months after I moved in, a new development went up about a quarter-mile down the road. Luxury homes, all cookie-cutter identical with their beige siding and black shutters. That's when the Pinewood Ridge HOA formed, and that's when my problem started. The woman holding the papers in front of my face was named Deborah Winters, president of the HOA board. She stood on my porch that February morning with her blonde bob perfectly styled despite the howling wind, wearing a puffy white coat that probably cost more than my snowmobile. "Mr. Reynolds, as you can see from the documentation, you've violated noise ordinances on 47 separate occasions over the past 8 months, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The fine is $10,000, payable within 30 days. I stared at the papers, then at her. "I don't live in your HOA. The noise pollution affects our community, regardless of your residential status. We've consulted with our attorney, and Vermont state law allows us to pursue damages from external sources that negatively impact our members' quality of life. I ride my snowmobile on weekends, on trails that have existed for decades, before your little suburb even existed." Deborah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Those trails run through easements that border our properties. The noise is unacceptable. Perhaps you should consider a quieter hobby." I felt my jaw clench. You moved next to snowmobile trails and are surprised when you hear snowmobiles. We're entitled to peaceful enjoyment of our properties. The fine stands. Good day, Mr. Reynolds." She turned and walked back to her pristine white SUV, leaving me standing there with papers that threatened to drain my savings account over something I'd been doing legally since before these people even knew this area existed. I called my buddy Jake that evening. He'd been riding these trails with me since we were teenagers, long before either of us owned property out here. "They can't actually do that, can they?" he asked over the phone. "I don't know. I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow." I sat at my kitchen table, the fine notice spread out in front of me. But get this, they documented every single time I went riding. Times, dates, estimated decibel levels. Someone's been watching me. That's creepy, man. That's Deborah Winters. I've seen her type before. Moves somewhere new and immediately wants to change everything to suit her personal preferences. The lawyer I consulted, Marcus Chen, had an office in downtown Burlington. He reviewed the documents with a frown that deepened with every page. "This is aggressive," he said finally. "And honestly, it's legally questionable. They're citing a state noise ordinance, but the enforcement mechanism they're using is unusual. However, fighting this in court will cost you money, possibly more than the fine itself. So I just pay it. That's the most economical option in the short term." He leaned back in his chair. "However, if you want to fight it on principle, we can. I'd need a retainer of $5,000 to start." I left his office feeling trapped. Pay the fine or pay legal fees with no guarantee of winning. Either way, Deborah Winters got what she wanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those trails, about the freedom of riding through fresh powder with the mountain wind in my face, about how my father had taken me on those same routes when I was 8 years old, about how this one woman with too much time and money thought she could just take that away from people. At 2 in the morning, I was still awake, scrolling through property records online. I'd always been good with research, a skill left over from my days working as an environmental surveyor before I started my own small construction business. That's when I found something interesting. The trail system everyone used wasn't actually public land. It was private property owned by something called Mountain Ridge Recreation, LLC. The company had existed since the 70s, maintaining the trails and granting access to the public. I dug deeper, searching business registration records, tax documents, anything I could find. By 4 in the morning, I discovered that Mountain Ridge Recreation, LLC was owned by a single individual, Harold Patterson, who was 87 years old and living in a nursing home in Montpelier. I barely waited until 9 the next morning to call the nursing home. After explaining who I was and that I wanted to discuss a business matter, they transferred me to Harold's room. His voice was rough but sharp when he answered. "Who's this, Mr. Patterson? My name is Scott Reynolds. I'm calling about Mountain Ridge Recreation and the trail system you own near Burlington. Haven't thought about that property in years. Why? I'm interested in potentially purchasing it from you." There was a long pause. "You serious?" "Very serious, sir." 3 days later, I was sitting in a conference room at the nursing home with Harold Patterson and his daughter, Linda, who had power of attorney over his business affairs. Harold was thin and gray, but his eyes were alert, studying me carefully. "The property's been in my family since 1972, he said. "My father bought it as an investment. We set up the LLC to manage it, keep the trails maintained. Never made much money from it, but it was never about that." "Why are you interested in buying it?" Linda asked. She was probably in her 50s, wearing business casual and an expression of careful skepticism. I decided honesty was the best approach. I told them everything about the HOA, about Deborah Winters, about the $10,000 fine for doing something that had been perfectly acceptable for decades. Harold laughed, a raspy sound that turned into a cough. When he recovered, he said, "I like you. You remind me of myself at your age." Some bureaucrat tried to shut down my logging operation once because she didn't like the trucks driving past her house. Woman had moved next to an active logging road and acted shocked that we used it. "What did you do?" I asked. "Bought the road." Then I rerouted it directly through her property line, legally permitted and everything. She moved within 6 months. He grinned. Trail property's about 300 acres total, includes all the main routes people use for snowmobiling, some areas for cross-country skiing in the right season. "What are you offering?" I'd done my research on property values. $250,000. Linda shook her head. "That's under market value for 300 acres in Vermont." "It's 300 acres of rocky mountain terrain with limited development potential and ongoing maintenance costs," I countered. "I pulled your tax records. You've been operating at a loss for the past 5 years. Harold studied me for a long moment, then looked at his daughter. "Take it." "Dad, we could get more if we listed it properly. And deal with developers who'll turn it into another suburb. I like this kid's spite. It's pure." He turned back to me. "250 works, but I have one condition. You keep the trails open for public use. Don't let one bitter woman ruin it for everyone else." "Actually, sir, I have a slightly different plan. One that keeps the trails open for the public, just not for specific people who don't appreciate them." Harold's grin widened. "I really like you. Linda, draw up the papers." The sale took 3 weeks to complete. I had to take out a mortgage, liquidate some investments, and max out a business line of credit I'd been keeping for emergencies. By mid-March, I was the official owner of Mountain Ridge Recreation LLC and 300 acres of prime snowmobiling terrain. The first thing I did was hire a proper surveyor to mark the exact boundaries of my new property. Turned out, portions of the trail system ran much closer to the Pinewood Ridge development than I'd initially realized. In fact, 3 of the access points people used were actually within 20 feet of HOA properties. The second thing I did was install signs. Large, professional signs at every trail access point that read, "Private Property, Mountain Ridge Recreation LLC, Access by Permission Only. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The third thing I did was draft a new access policy. I worked with Marcus Chen, my lawyer, to make sure it was airtight. The trails would remain open to the general public for recreational use. However, access could be revoked from any individual at the discretion of the property owner. All I had to do was file a formal notice with the sheriff's department, and specific people would be legally barred from the property. "You're really doing this," Marcus said, reviewing the paperwork in his office. "I'm really doing this. Deborah Winters is going to lose her mind. That's the idea." I waited until the first weekend in April, when the late-season snow was perfect for riding. I knew from my research that several Pinewood Ridge residents were avid snowmobilers themselves. In fact, Deborah's husband, Kevin, owned 2 high-end ski-doos and rode almost every weekend. I was out on my own snowmobile that Saturday morning, cruising down one of the main trails, when I spotted Kevin Winters and 3 other guys from the HOA development. I recognized them from the neighborhood watch meetings I'd been forced to attend when they'd first started harassing me about noise. I pulled up alongside Kevin and killed my engine. He did the same, lifting his helmet visor. "Scott," he said, his tone careful. "Nice morning." "Beautiful," I agreed. "Hey, Kevin, did you see the new signs posted at the trailheads?" "Yeah, what's that about? These trails have always been public." "Actually, they haven't. They're privately owned, have been since the 70s. One of the other riders, a guy named Brad Hutchins, pulled up closer. "So what? Some company's going to start charging for access." "No, access remains free for the general public." I paused, letting them relax slightly before continuing. "However, I'm the new owner, and I've decided to ban certain individuals from using the property." Kevin's expression shifted. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you, Kevin, and you, Brad. And everyone else from Pinewood Ridge who supported that ridiculous $10,000 fine your HOA slapped me with." "You can't do that," Brad said. "I absolutely can. It's private property. I have the legal right to determine who can and cannot access it. You'll all be receiving formal notice next week. As of today, you're trespassing." Kevin's face reddened. "This is because of Deborah's noise complaint. That's what this is about. Your wife tried to fine me for using trails that I've ridden since I was a kid. Trails that existed long before your development. She wanted to make my life difficult over something completely legal, so now I'm returning the favor." "Be reasonable," Kevin said. "We can work something out." "You mean like how reasonable your HOA was with me? How they documented my every move for 8 months and slapped me with a massive fine without even attempting a conversation first?" I shook my head. "Nope, you made your choice. Now live with it." I started my engine and rode off, leaving them sitting there on their expensive snowmobiles, probably trying to figure out if I was serious. I was very serious. The formal notices went out the following Tuesday. I'd compiled a list of every Pinewood Ridge resident who'd signed the petition supporting the noise ordinance enforcement, 47 people in total. Each one received a certified letter informing them They were banned from Mountain Ridge recreation property, effective immediately. The letter included a map of the property boundaries and a warning that any violation would result in criminal trespassing charges. My phone started ringing within hours. Kevin called, trying to negotiate. I didn't answer. Brad sent texts threatening legal action. I forwarded them to Marcus, who assured me everything I was doing was perfectly legal. Several other residents called, some angry, some trying to apologize on behalf of the HOA. Deborah herself showed up at my house on Thursday evening. I saw her white SUV pull into my driveway and met her at the door before she could knock. "We need to talk," she said. Her earlier composure was cracked around the edges. She looked stressed. "I don't think we have anything to discuss. You can't ban half the neighborhood from public trails." "It's ridiculous. They're not public trails, they're my trails, and I can ban whoever I want. This is because of the fine, isn't it? Fine, we'll drop it. Consider it forgotten. Just give everyone their trail access back." "You think you can harass me for months, hit me with a huge fine, and then just say, 'Oops, never mind' when I actually fight back?" I shook my head. "That's not how this works." Kevin is miserable. Half the men in the neighborhood are furious. They're blaming me. Good. Maybe you should have thought about consequences before you started this. Her expression hardened, the mask of civility dropping. "You're being childish. This is a gross overreaction." "No, Deborah, what you did was the overreaction. You moved next to established recreational trails and immediately tried to shut them down because you didn't like the noise. You weaponized your HOA and threatened my finances over illegal activity. All I'm doing is exercising my property rights. If you don't like it, well, now you know how I felt." "We'll sue. Marcus Chen is my lawyer. He's assured me that everything I'm doing is completely legal. But please, go ahead and sue. Rack up those legal fees. See how your HOA members feel when you tell them their dues are going toward a lawsuit you'll lose." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to keep threatening or try a different approach. Finally, she said, "What do you want?" "I want you to leave me alone. Forever. I want the fine rescinded in writing. I want a formal apology from the HOA board. And I want everyone in Pinewood Ridge to understand that these trails were here first, and they're going to stay here, and if they don't like the noise, they can move somewhere else." "That's unreasonable." "Then I guess your neighbors don't get their trail access back. Your choice, Deborah." She turned and walked back to her SUV without another word. The door slam echoed across my property. Over the next few weeks, life got interesting. Some of the banned residents tried to access the trails anyway. I'd hired a couple of local guys, friends who needed part-time work, to patrol the property on weekends. They had cameras and phones with direct lines to the sheriff's department. We caught Brad Hutchins on the trails 2 weeks after the ban went into effect. The sheriff's deputy who responded was Tom Morrison, a guy I'd gone to high school with. He found Brad about half a mile into the trail system, trying to play dumb about the restriction. "I didn't see any signs," Brad claimed. Tom pointed to the large notice posted at the trailhead. "That sign right there says private property and no trespassing. I thought that was just for show." "You received a certified letter banning you from this property, correct?" Brad's face reddened. "This is harassment. He's doing this to be vindictive. It's his property. He has the right to restrict access." Tom pulled out his citation book. "I'm issuing you a warning this time, but if you're caught here again, you'll be charged with criminal trespass." Brad rode out, glaring at me where I stood near the trailhead. I just waved. The HOA held an emergency meeting 3 days later. I wasn't invited, but Kevin called me afterward. He sounded exhausted. "Half the neighborhood wants Deborah removed from the board," he said. This has turned into a complete disaster. I'm aware. What do you actually want, Scott? Specifically, I told Deborah, the fine rescinded in writing, a formal apology, and a guarantee that you'll all leave me alone. The board is meeting tomorrow to draft a response. Deborah's fighting it, but she's outvoted. You'll have what you want by end of week. And the people who don't live in Pinewood Ridge, the public riders who use these trails, I want your HOA to go on record supporting the trail system and acknowledging its importance to the community. There was a pause. You want us to publicly support the thing we tried to shut down? Yes. Kevin sighed. I'll see what I can do. The document arrived via email 3 days later. It was signed by 4 of the 5 board members, everyone except Deborah. The fine was officially rescinded. The HOA offered a formal apology for overreach in enforcement actions and acknowledged that the trail system was a valuable recreational resource that predated the Pinewood Ridge development. They committed to working cooperatively with surrounding property owners regarding any future concerns. It was everything I'd asked for in writing, legally binding. I lifted the ban the following week, but only for the people who'd signed the apology. Deborah and 7 other residents who'd refused to sign remained permanently banned. I made sure they knew that decision was final. The story spread through the snowmobiling community pretty quickly. I got calls from riders all over Vermont, people thanking me for standing up to the HOA and keeping the trails open. A couple of local news stations even reached out for interviews. I did one with Channel 5 in Burlington, explaining the situation carefully, making sure to emphasize that I supported public access to recreational areas, but wouldn't tolerate people moving in and immediately trying to restrict longtime residents' activities. The publicity didn't do me any favors with Deborah. She tried one more time to make trouble, filing a complaint with the town zoning board claiming my trail maintenance activities violated land use regulations. That backlog fired spectacularly when the zoning officer visited the property, saw that everything was perfectly legitimate, and actually commended me for the upkeep. By the time summer rolled around, things had settled into a new normal. The trails stayed open. I continued riding on weekends. The Pinewood Ridge HOA left me alone, mostly because Deborah had been voted off the board in a special election that May. Apparently, enough residents had gotten sick of her causing problems. Kevin Winters actually apologized to me in person one day when I ran into him at the hardware store in town. I should have stood up to her from the start, he said. Deborah gets an idea in her head and just runs with it, never considers whether she might be wrong. Where is she now? I asked. We're getting divorced, actually. This whole thing made me realize some stuff about our marriage. He shook his head. She's already talking about moving to Massachusetts, wants to be closer to her sister. Sorry to hear that. Don't be. It's been a long time coming. He hesitated, then said, would you consider letting Deborah back on the trails? I know that's a lot to ask. No. Fair enough. But the story wasn't quite finished. In July, I got a call from Marcus Chen asking me to come to his office for an urgent meeting. When I arrived, he had a grim expression that immediately put me on alert. We have a problem, he said. I've been contacted by a lawyer representing Deborah Winters. She's planning to file a civil suit against you for tortious interference and emotional distress. For what? Everything I did was legal. Legal, yes, but she's arguing that you deliberately purchased the property for the sole purpose of harassing her and her neighbors. She's claiming your actions constitute a pattern of targeted harassment. I sat down heavily. Can she win in court? Probably not. But she can make the lawsuit expensive and time-consuming for you. It's a nuisance suit designed to drain your resources and force a settlement. So she can't get what she wants legitimately, so now she's trying to sue me into submission. That's essentially it. I thought about it for a long moment. What are my options? Fight it and probably win, but spend time and money doing so, or settle for some kind of compromise that gives her what she wants. No settlement. If she wants a fight, we'll fight. Marcus nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. However, I've done some digging into Deborah's activities, and I found something interesting. Do you remember how the HOA documented your snowmobile rides for 8 months? Hard to forget. I got my hands on some of those records through discovery for this case. The documentation was extremely detailed. Times, dates, noise levels measured with a decibel meter. But here's the thing, the measurements were taken from inside your property line. It took me a second to understand what he was saying. She was trespassing. Repeatedly and deliberately, for months. She would cross onto your land to take measurements that she then used to justify the fine. That's not just trespassing, Scott. Given the pattern and the fact she used the information to pursue financial damages against you, we could potentially make a case for stalking and harassment. At minimum, it completely undermines her current lawsuit. I felt a slow smile spreading across my face. Can we use this? Already on it. I'm drafting a countersuit. We'll also be filing a complaint with the state police, because if this rises to the level of criminal harassment, they need to know about it. The next few weeks moved fast. Marcus filed the countersuit, and simultaneously, I went to the Vermont State Police Barracks in Williston to file a formal complaint. The trooper who took my statement was a no-nonsense woman named Sergeant Patricia Kimball. She listened to everything, reviewed the documents Marcus had prepared, and took copies of the trespassing evidence. This is unusual, she said. But if what you're saying is accurate, and she repeatedly entered your property to document your activities for the purpose of pursuing a complaint against you, that could potentially meet the threshold for stalking under Vermont law. What happens now? I'll forward this to our criminal investigations unit. They'll review it and determine if charges are warranted. 2 weeks later, Deborah Winters was interviewed by state police investigators. I wasn't present, but Marcus heard from her lawyer that she'd admitted to taking the measurements, but claimed she didn't realize she was on my property when she did so. The problem with that defense was the GPS coordinates embedded in the photos she'd taken, which clearly showed her exact location, well within my property boundaries. In September, Deborah was charged with criminal trespass and harassment. Both were misdemeanors, but the harassment charge carried potential jail time, though that was unlikely for a first offense. Her civil suit against me was dropped immediately. You can't sue someone for responding to your own illegal behavior. Her lawyer knew it would get laughed out of court. The criminal case took until December to resolve. Deborah pled no contest to both charges. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, ordered to pay restitution for my legal fees, and given 200 hours of community service. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Kevin confirmed that she moved to Massachusetts shortly after the sentencing. He seemed relieved. By the time January rolled around again, a full year after this whole mess started, life had finally settled down. The trails were busy that winter, lots of snow and perfect riding conditions. I'd expanded the patrol program, hiring a few more guys to help with maintenance and monitoring. We were even making a little money from voluntary donations. Some riders threw in $20 or $50 to help with grooming costs. One Saturday morning in late January, I was out on the trails early, enjoying fresh powder and the silence of the woods. I stopped at one of the scenic overlooks, a spot where you could see all the way down to Burlington and Lake Champlain in the distance. Jake pulled up beside me on his snowmobile, killing his engine. We sat there for a minute, just taking in the view. "You know," he said finally, "when you told me you were going to buy the whole trail system just to ban the HOA people, I thought you'd lost your mind." "Maybe I did. But you did it. You actually pulled it off, and now the trails are protected and better maintained than they've ever been." "That was always the plan. Was it? Or did you just want revenge?" I thought about that. Maybe it started as revenge, but it turned into something better. These trails matter. They're part of this community's history. If I hadn't bought them, who knows what would have happened? Maybe Harold's daughter would have sold to developers, and we'd have lost access forever. Instead, you own 300 acres of prime Vermont mountain land. Instead, everyone owns them. I'm just the caretaker. We sat there a while longer, watching the morning sun burn off the fog in the valley below. Then we started our engines and headed back down the trail, carving fresh tracks through the powder, the sound of our snowmobiles echoing off the mountains the way it had for generations. Deborah Winters had tried to take that away, to impose her preferences on everyone else without regard for history or community or the simple pleasure of winter in Vermont. She'd learned the hard way that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you're on the wrong side to begin with. As for me, I'd learned something too. Sometimes fighting back doesn't mean stooping to someone else's level. Sometimes it means finding a creative solution that's better than the original problem. The trail system was safer now, better maintained and protected from future development. The community had rallied around it once they realized it was in danger, and I'd made it clear that you can't just move somewhere and immediately start trying to change everything to suit yourself. Communities have history. They have traditions. And sometimes, those things are worth protecting, even if it costs you. The whole experience had cost me almost everything I'd saved between the property purchase, legal fees, and the ongoing maintenance costs. But I'd kept the trails open. I'd stood up to bullying disguised as bureaucracy. And I'd made sure that future generations could experience the same freedom I'd known since I was 8 years old, riding behind my father through fresh snow with the whole mountain spread out before us. That was worth more than money. I rode most of that winter, more than I had in years. Something about the whole situation had rekindled my appreciation for it, reminded me why I loved living here in the first place. The mountains, the snow, the sense of space and freedom that you can't find in many places anymore. In March, I got an unexpected visitor. Harold Patterson's daughter, Linda, called and asked if she could visit the property. I met her at the main trailhead on a sunny Saturday afternoon. "Dad passed away last month," she said. "He was 98, lived a good long life. I'm sorry to hear that. Before he died, he asked me to come check on the trails. He wanted to make sure you were keeping your word about maintaining them." She looked around at the well-marked trails, the new signs, the cleared brush. "I can see you have been. Your father gave me a gift when he sold me this property. I don't take that lightly." He knew that. He told me before he died that selling to you was one of the best decisions he'd made in his later years. Said you reminded him of himself, someone who understood that some things matter more than profit. We walked one of the trails together, and I showed her the improvements we'd made. The reinforced bridges over streams, the expanded parking area, the donation box that was helping fund ongoing maintenance. "There's something else," Linda said as we headed back toward the parking area. "Dad left you something in his will. It's not much, just $20,000. He wanted you to use it for the trail system to make sure it stays maintained properly." I was speechless for a moment. "That's incredibly generous. He believed in what you're doing here." And honestly, After everything you went through to protect this place, I do too." The money from Harold's estate went into a dedicated trail maintenance fund. I set up a proper nonprofit organization to manage it, with a board of directors drawn from the local snowmobiling and outdoor recreation community. That way, even if something happened to me, the trails would be protected. By the time spring arrived, and the snow melted, Mountain Ridge Recreation had become something bigger than I'd originally intended. We weren't just maintaining trails anymore. We were hosting community events, organizing volunteer workdays to clear fallen trees and repair erosion damage, and building relationships with other trail systems in Vermont to create an interconnected network. The Pinewood Ridge HOA had a new president by then, a reasonable guy named Tom Fletcher who actually rode snowmobiles himself. He reached out in April to ask if there was any way the HOA could support the trail system. After some discussion, they committed to an annual donation and agreed to help with periodic cleanup days. It was a complete turnaround from Deborah's hostile approach. I even ran into Kevin Winters one more time, in late spring. He was at a local restaurant with a woman I didn't recognize, and he looked happier than I'd ever seen him. "Scott," he said, standing to shake my hand. "This is Angela. Angela, this is the guy I told you about, the one with the snowmobile trails." Angela smiled. "Kevin talks about those trails constantly. He can't wait for next winter. You'll both have to come riding," I said. "Season passes are free for locals, as always." We chatted for a few minutes, and as I was leaving, Kevin caught my arm. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." I know that probably sounds weird, given how everything went down, but this whole situation forced me to reevaluate my life. I'm in a better place now, literally and figuratively. I'm glad it worked out for you. Deborah's still in Massachusetts, miserable from what I hear. Apparently, she joined an HOA board there and is already causing problems. He shook his head. Some people never learn. I thought about Deborah sometimes, usually when I was out on the trails. I wondered if she ever understood why she'd lost so badly, if she'd ever realized that her approach had been fundamentally wrong from the start. Probably not. People like her rarely did, but that wasn't my problem anymore. The following winter was the best riding season I could remember. Heavy snowfall, cold temperatures that kept the powder fresh, and weekends filled with people enjoying the trails. Families with kids, experienced riders pushing their machines, cross-country skiers using the side trails we designated for them. The whole community came together around this shared resource. I hired Jake on full-time to help manage operations. He'd been laid off from his construction job in November, and the timing was perfect. Together, we expanded the trail system slightly, adding a few beginner-friendly routes and improving safety signage throughout. We never had another serious incident with trespassers or people trying to cause problems. Word had spread about what had happened with Deborah Winters, and I think most people understood that I was serious about protecting the property, but fair to everyone who respected the rules. The whole experience taught me something important about conflict and resolution. When someone tries to bully you, whether through an HOA or any other mechanism, you have choices. You can submit and let them win. You can fight them directly in a battle of escalation, or you can find a creative solution that changes the entire dynamic. I'd chosen the third option, and it had worked out better than I could have imagined. Not only had I protected my own interests, but I'd preserved something valuable for the entire community. The trail system was now secure for future generations, managed responsibly, and supported by the very people who'd once tried to shut it down. Deborah's attempt to fine me $10,000 had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. She'd lost her position, her marriage, and her standing in the community. She'd been charged with crimes and forced to leave town in disgrace. And the thing she'd tried to destroy, the trail system, was stronger and more protected than ever. I couldn't help but see the poetic justice in it. As I write this now, sitting in my cabin overlooking the same mountains I've loved my entire life, I can hear snowmobiles in the distance. It's a Saturday afternoon in February, and the trails are busy with riders enjoying perfect conditions. That sound, the one Deborah Winters found so objectionable, has become a soundtrack of victory to me. It represents freedom, tradition, and the successful defense of both against someone who thought rules and regulations could override common sense and community values. It reminds me that sometimes the right response to bureaucratic bullying is creative resistance, finding solutions that are better than simple revenge. Mountain Ridge Recreation operates smoothly now, with minimal input needed from me. Jake handles day-to-day operations. The board of directors makes major decisions. Volunteers help with maintenance. It's become exactly what Harold Patterson probably envisioned when he first established the LLC 50 years ago, a community resource that belongs to everyone and no one, maintained by people who care about preserving it. I still ride every weekend, weather permitting. Sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, occasionally leading groups of newcomers who want to learn the trails. Each time I head out, I pass the spot where Deborah Winters stood that February morning, serving me with her ridiculous fine, thinking she'd won. She had no idea that her attempted power play would lead to the permanent protection of 300 acres of trail system, the creation of a thriving nonprofit organization, and her own criminal prosecution. She'd fundamentally misunderstood the situation, assuming that money and lawyers and HOA rules would be enough to get what she wanted. But Vermont isn't like that. We're independent up here, fiercely protective of our traditions and our land. We don't respond well to outsiders moving in and immediately trying to change things. We definitely don't respond well to bullying. Deborah Winters learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm glad she did. Not because I enjoyed seeing her fail, though I won't pretend I didn't appreciate the justice of it, but because her failure became a success story for everyone else. The trails are protected, the community is stronger, and future HOA presidents will think twice before trying to weaponize noise ordinances against longtime residents engaging in traditional activities. That's worth celebrating. As winter gives way to spring again, and the snow begins to melt, I'm already planning for next season. We're going to expand the beginner trails, add some warming shelters at strategic points, and maybe create a formal racing event to raise money for maintenance. The possibilities are endless now that we have stable management and community support. Jake suggested we name one of the trails after Harold Patterson, and I think that's a perfect idea. He'll probably propose it at the next board meeting. It feels right to honor the man who had faith in me when I needed it most, who saw past the immediate situation to the bigger picture. I'm also planning to expand my own property slightly, buying another 50 acres adjacent to the trail system. It'll give us more buffer space and create opportunities for additional routes. The landowner is willing to sell at a reasonable price, and I've learned that protecting this land is worth the investment. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Deborah had approached me differently that first time. If she'd knocked on my door and said, "Hey, the noise from the snowmobiles is really bothering some of our residents. Can we talk about possible solutions?" Maybe we could have worked out designated quiet hours, or I could have adjusted my routes to minimize noise near their homes. I would have been open to reasonable compromises, but she didn't want compromise. She wanted total victory, complete elimination of something she found inconvenient. And that approach, that all-or-nothing mentality, is what ultimately destroyed her. It's a lesson I've taken to heart in other areas of my life. When conflicts arise, and they always do, the goal shouldn't be crushing the opposition. It should be finding solutions that work for everyone, or at least most people. Deborah couldn't see that, and it cost her everything. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here in my cabin, looking out at mountains covered in snow, knowing that those trails will be here long after I'm gone. That kids will learn to ride there, just like I did. That families will make memories there. That the community will continue to gather around this shared resource. All because one woman tried to fine me $10,000 for doing something completely legal, and I decided to fight back in a way she never anticipated. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something better than what existed before, something that benefits everyone and can't be easily torn down. That's what Mountain Ridge Recreation represents now. Not just my victory over an overbearing HOA president, but a lasting gift to the community. And that, more than anything else, makes all the stress and expense and conflict worthwhile. The snow is falling again outside my window. Fresh powder for tomorrow's ride. I can already hear Jake on the phone, calling our regular group to let them know conditions will be perfect. In the distance, I can see lights in the Pinewood Ridge development, families settling in for the evening. Some of them will be out on the trails tomorrow, enjoying what we've built together. And that's exactly how it should be.